Once upon a time, there was a thriving Jewish community here in Riga. Famous philosophers such as Isaiah Berlin was born in this city after the Second World War. Only 1,000 of them survived. When I was young, the dynamic and blurring boundary between the virtual and wise has bewildered me for a long time. I found the obvious contradictions of freedom which simultaneously exist in the same society was a very difficult idea to comprehend. In accordance with Isaiah Berlin, liberty for wolves is death for the lambs. When stepping into this exhibition, the subtle dichotomy between the mainstream Christian society and the Jewish enclaves is all in a sudden unbearable. I was suffocated when thinking about how much the former Jewish glory was destroyed by a single man's decision effectively. Once upon a time, there were around 40 synagogues in Latvia. Many of them are in Riga, also in Daugavpils, where the famous Mark Rothko and his family lived before the severe progression of the Jewish persecution, and many of the Jewish intellectuals actually live in two separate worlds. Partially they live in their own Jewish community, but some of them actually lived in a broader sense of Europe. The Jews were harshly marginalized. Nevertheless, they used the limited opportunities they had at the time well and created a decent life for themselves. Young Jewish children were no longer instructed in only Hebrew or Yiddish in school, rather than dominating European languages. Many were determined to master a certain skill well in order to survive upon a competitive labor market. As a rule, Jews could only get work in enterprises which were owned by the Jews in the independent Latvia Republic. Despite such harsh constraint, the employment rate amongst the Jewish population was as high as 95% before the outbreak of the Second World War. Between 1941 and 1942, more than 24,000 Jewish people were deported from their home to various different concentration camps. What they lost is not only their life and flesh. What they really lost is their various different individuality. Instead, they were known as the Jews. The horrible crime of the Holocaust always brings out so much tears. The Latvian story of the Holocaust is not only limited by the bloody torturings, the inhuman heavy labors, or the ruthless killings. The most devastating feature was the fact that the Soviet government exaggerated the actual figures and fabricated the tasteless heroic stories of the USSR contributions when fighting against the Nazi Germany, in order to serve in their propaganda endeavors, especially when producing the propaganda material which were used abroad. When the target of a competition was the number of the victims who were massacred by the Nazis, the disastrous suffering functions as a tasteless propaganda tool, aiming to legitimate a violent regime. The Latvia Ghetto was by all means a terrifying place in the beginning of the 40s. The devastating Jews from many Central European countries were deported here by the ferocious German soldiers with a one-way ticket. Very few were certain about their future, and very few survived this calamity. The Republic of Latvia was annexed by the Soviet Union in 1941, shortly after the Nazi German troops occupied Riga. In the following days, the local Latvian volunteers chased down the adult Jewish men who did not escape with their families in time by various reasons, and drove them to the ghetto. The Jews in the following years were denied the sufficient amount of food, the warm clothes in the wintertime, or any adequate medical treatments. Most strong young Jewish men were forced to conduct heavy labors, whilst the blossoming young Jewish girls were subjected to various abhorrent sexual assaults. Once upon a time, more than 30,000 Jewish people lived in the Riga ghetto. All of them have to wear this yellow David star on their coat, on their clothes, to indicate that they're Jewish. They are the unwanted ones. They are the public enemy of the land upon which the Christian people are living. Soon, the non-Jewish inhabitants were forced away from the ghetto. The high fence was constructed to isolate the area from the rest of the district, as if the Jews who lived in ghetto were hideous ghosts who would destroy the Latvian society by simply being alive. The yellow stars, which they had to have all the time, signifies that they were as dangerous as the plague in the Middle Age. Very few had the luxury to visit the city outside the metal walls, although many of the incarcerated Jews were once well-connected merchants who often traveled between the huge metropolitan cities in Europe. The familiar sound of the steam engines and the scent of the combustion gas from the nearby train station must be a torturing feature in their daily life. As the cold wind from the ocean blew towards their bodies in the dark winter night, the feeling of being away from home must be the most insufferable torment. The ghetto was soon overcrowded. The liquidation went even faster. In the beginning of 1940, when the German troops occupied Latvia, they also transported thousands of Jewish people from different regions in the Baltic cities, Baltic nations, and also the rest of Central Europe to Riga, and many of them were executed in this area. On the 30th November 1941, a huge number of the blue-colored buses arrived to the gates of the Jewish ghetto, whilst the Jewish people who spoke very different languages walked out of the fence under guard. 12 kilometers away, in the middle of the coniferous forest, the Soviet war criminals were digging the frozen earth and creating the huge execution pits, preparing the forthcoming shooting actions. The unclassified documents reveal that the Germans slaughtered 4,000 people on that infamous day after the war. The sound of the gunfire must have continued for a long time. When I closed my eyes and listened to the wind that blew away from my head, I could almost sense the scent of the dried blood and the smoke which seeped through the metal barrels of the German rifles. I could vision how the red-colored fresh blood flows through the frozen dark-colored earth after certain detonation, but I had no courage to visualize the fear and the despair in the victim's eyes. There are a number of huge mass graves in this forest. When walking around, I have to admit that respect for any charismatic leader, no matter if his surname is Hitler or Trump. I think we must rethink about our concept of an adequate leader. Do we really want to have a strong leader who wants to dictate to us what is right and what is wrong? Or do we believe that we need to have a leader who wants to listen to us? We really heal our deepest sorrow by punishing the responsible officers who carried out such an appalling crime with the most severe penalties. Or shall we examine why the savage Nazi regime could come up to the highest power democratically? Why do we still keep so many fanatical ideas in our current society by believing that we, the imperfect beings, could differentiate what is righteous from what is malevolent? When looking at each and every gravestone, I'm certain that a similar tragedy in such a big scale might occur again, because so many people still choose to believe the biased summaries of a complicated crisis. The life of the Jews under the communistic dictatorship was by no means improved. Just look at this illustration, which was found in one of the communistic newspaper, Kampf. A strong proletariat worker is carrying away a group of Jewish people. All of them look really mad and angry, as if it's the obvious right thing to do, to just shovel them away from the well of time. Communist rule brought new misfortunes for the Jewish population. Firstly, the Bolsheviks were materialists. Any religion, regardless Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, were regarded as the intellectual poison, destroying the Zionism and the traditional Jewish life, in which the religious traditions were important features, was protected by the proletarian ideologies. Many Jew-founded synagogues were confiscated by the government. Secondly, many Jews were entrepreneurs, the capitalists. In accordance with Vladimir Lenin, the new round of anti-Semitism was an attempt to divert the hatred of the workers and peasants from the exploiters towards the Jews. We have visited a number of Jewish heritage sites in both Central Europe and the Baltic states lately, aiming to scrutinize how the prevailing general consensus influences the subjective view upon a complex issue. Honestly, we have more questions today after learning the petrifying history of the Latvian Holocaust, and the idea of intellectual maturity entails many new implications.